Richard and Kaylin leave Adie's house to follow through the path into the boundary. The rain has let up for now, and the path they walk is covered in a soft carpet of brown pine needles. The way is still surrounded by comforting parts of nature. The dead trees which have fallen seem to have found peace, as many ferns make the path into the other world seem a lot less threatening. There's even some fussy squirrels that don't much like having two new people walking through their front yard. Lousy adventurers always coming through and wrecking up the place. I've got my eye on you, just don't try anything funny. And with that being said, Richard immediately pulls a branch off of a nearby balsam fir only to strip all of the needles attached to it for absolutely no reason at all. Squirrely? Yes, dear. We got some trouble outside. Make sure the winter nuts are locked up tight. I don't want to scare the kids, but just to be safe, I'm going to go get my nut gun out of my nut safe. It's loaded with nuts. I always pray that I never have to use it, but I won't be the one laying there wishing I had if it comes to it. Fortunately, they're able to pass without incident, having successfully skirted a danger they were not even aware of. The squirrels let them go, thankful for only suffering some minor property damage. Richard and Kaylin start having a conversation about Adie, the bone woman, and the difference between wizards and sorceresses. Richard tells Kaylin that Adie is like a transformer, definitely more than meets the eye. Kaylin says, yep, she's a sorceress, and Richard, never having learned a single thing about magic in his entire life, says, what's a sorceress? I've never learned a thing about magic in my life. And Kaylin answers him by comparing a thing of magic he knows nothing about to another thing of magic he knows nothing about, and says Adie is less than a wizard, but more than them. Richard takes a moment to smell the sweet smell of the needles he just pulled off that fir tree, and then casts them into the winds. Richard thinks to himself that a sorceress and a wizard might be more than him, but he remembers how fearful Zed and Adie looked once Katie had her hand on them and was making the threat she could use her power on them. And he wonders what that has to do with the thunder without sound he experienced twice, before with the quad and with the night wisp. He also remembers the pain from being close to it. Richard and Kaylin continue down the trail, and Richard is much better at knowing where to go than Kaylin is. She can see the trail sometimes, but his experience makes him the one to have to point out the paths, which are harder for her to see. Richard thinks about what he's going to do once he gets to the Midland, and immediately his mind goes to his friend Zed, wishing he were there to share his plan with him because he felt foolish to be charging into the Midlands without his friend. He feels like once he makes it, he'll be wandering around aimlessly and won't have any direction because he's never been there before. While he is processing his thoughts, he makes it to a spot on the trail where there is a steep wall of rock they're going to have to climb. It feels like it would be easier to try and go around, but Richard remembers Addie's warning about sticking to the path and decides the direct approach is the only way. He thinks to himself there must be a reason the trail goes this way and that. Once he makes it to the top of the rock, he reaches down and pulls Kaylin up. Richard goes back to thinking and realizes it's likely that someone is hiding the last box from Dark and Rawl and he can't find it. He decides his best option is to think about how to find someone with magic who might know where the missing box is, and that some of that magic might be good for finding the boxes of Orden. He hopes that whoever has the box is not a friend of Dark and Rawl, and they will be able to convince them to help keep it from him. Richard likes the knowledge that even if Dark and Rawl finds the third box, he doesn't have the guidebook to tell him which box will kill him. Since Richard knows the book by heart, he starts reciting it and looking for a way to use it to stop Dark and Rawl. But that's impossible, because the book is written like it's designed to help people understand the process and not identify ways to easily stop them from trying to succeed. Richard notices that most of the book is identifying problems which might occur and how to get around those problems. And only the very last part of it has anything to do with what it will mean for the person opening the box. The woods start to become slowly more dreary as they travel. Richard and Kaylin are covered in dirt and sweat, and both of them take the opportunity to splash a little cold water on their face. Richard spots a shadow thing on the road, and Kaylin tells her it is better not to touch it or your skin might split open. And they shouldn't let it touch him because of that. At first, both of them have a hard time seeing it, but they're definitely able to spot it off in the distance. They move quickly to go around the shadow. Later on in the day, they eat some lunch and travel at a medium pace. Richard remembers Adie's warning to be on the lookout against things which appear to be dead loved ones, but are actually monsters that want to entice them into the boundary and kill them. Richard realizes they must be getting close to the Narrows. He's tired and wants to take a rest, but Addie told them they better not stop or something bad would happen, even though it's about to be the dead of night, and it would have been impossible to leave on their journey, so they would reach the Narrows at sunrise instead of sunset. But I digress. Richard notices Kaylin is extra jumpy. She grabs his arm when they see a shadow nearby and can only stare at it with frightened, wide eyes. Richard feels panic inside himself and wants to run. He realizes even if they can't see him, if they make him scared enough to convince him running is a good idea, he could end up running straight into the boundary, and it would be the same thing as if they were dead from running into them. The woods are dead quiet except for a raspy scraping noise Richard can hear off the trail. Kaylin gets an epic jump scare when a branch brushes into her face, and she uses it as the perfect excuse to grab Richard's arm and get him to tell her everything is all right. And it works. They can see how hard it is to see the trail at night. Telling the shadows from the trees and from the shadow things on the trail is very difficult for them. Kaylin can see the shadow things, can't see them. But can she see why kids love the taste of Cinnamon Toast Crunch? Kaylin is so scared, Richard literally has to pry her fingers off his arm because she's really digging in. She wonders what they will do if the shadow things come for them, and Richard tells her the sword of truth stopped the things in the boundary. It will stop them here too. Richard feels like pulling the sword of truth, but he worries that he might have to give their position away if he does that. And there are no guarantees that it even will work. But there don't seem to be too many of them for the sword to make a difference anyway, so it's better to just keep the sword put away and save it for when he knows he's going to need it later. The woods get dark, and it begins to feel like thousands of eyes are watching him from every direction. Richard can hear the soft scraping sounds again, and he can feel the shadow things on both sides of the trail, as well as creeping up behind them. The only clear path is in front of them. Kaylin says she's having a hard time seeing the path and asks Richard if they should take out the Nightstone. Richard feels like it might be a bad idea to whip it out because it might overpower the bones, keeping them hidden from the shadow things. Richard narrates that in the dark it's difficult to see the trail, and it isn't a straight path. It's not like the normal hike through the woods. The trail twists. It goes over rocks and roots. It almost feels circular at times, going around trees and along the side of a hill. The soft scraping sound is steadily getting closer and closer, and Richard finally realizes what that scraping noise is. It's claws on rocks. In the night, Richard sees two shadows pressed against the sides of the trail. They have to pass through them. Kaylin is just terrified to be as close to them as she has to be while they pass. Kaylin is unable to proceed any further without Richard there to put his arms around her and let her block them from her sight. He realizes she is terrified of them and can't function around them. He admits that he's terrified too. He says every step feels like a violation. Every inch feels like an inch too far. But when he looks back down the trail he's been on, he can't see if the shadow things are following behind them. All of a sudden, in front of them is a dark black shape which Richard recognizes as the giant rock with a split down the middle. They had made it to the Narrows. Once they enter the rock, Richard knows it is time to use the Nightstone. The trail is invisible. There is no light. Richard and Kaylin are in a place of total blackness with no direction to be given by their senses. Having decided there is no other option, Richard takes the leather pouch with the Nightstone inside it and dumps the stone into his hand. Once he does, there is a warm yellowish light which floods the surrounding area, making them both gasp at what they see next. Having been given clarity by the Nightstone, Richard and Kaylin can finally see what's going on around them. The yellow light reveals a solid wall of shadow things forming a half circle less than 20 feet in front of them. On the ground are dozens and dozens of grippers calling around. The light of the Nightstone seems to let the shadows know where they are, and they begin moving towards them. They're headed right for us. Richard grabs Kaylin's shirt and pulls her into the split of the rock. The walls of the rock are tight, and they give Richard anxiety as he feels the dark, wet, slimy walls closing in around him, making all of the women and all of the men happy for different reasons as both of their shirts become completely soaked through. They go through a tight spot where they needed to learn how to make it through a small crack in the rock, which is enough to stop the shadow things from following them, but not the grippers. Richard kicks one of them that gets too close, causing it to fly a good distance and land on its back. It stands up with its body to reveal all of its claws, hisses at Richard, and then begins to slowly crawl back towards them. Having made it through the crack, Richard pulls out the nightstone to find the trail again, but a mass of rocks and trees and other things moved by a recent mudslide has completely destroyed the trail. Richard steps back to get a better look, and the green wall of the boundary appears, and the author leaves us hanging at the end of chapter 18 by having both of them notice that the shadows are once again coming right for them. The symbolism here shows Richard's added clarity and realization of exactly how dangerous of a spot they're in right now. And he's right. That moment of clarity is a shock for people, and that is why it needs to happen from a place of honest blindness. When a person is trying to use the truth and honesty with fear as their motivation, that moment of shock won't kill a person, but it will kill whatever chance they had at learning what's hiding outside their field of view, because they're so thoroughly focused on what they're afraid of. Richard realizes the only solution when you have been traveling halfway through hell is to keep moving forward. The grippers are always there, always angry, very persistent, always trying to latch on, easy to overlook, deadly if ignored. And that is why honesty is their natural enemy. With the trail washed out and the walls of the boundary nearby, Richard and Kaylin now must find their way on their own without the aid of a trail to follow. Only the walls of the boundary are left to guide them, with the shadow things close on their heels. It's time for the official number 1 quote from Seeking the Truth About the Sword of Truth in Wizard's First Rule, Chapter 19. Please note that the views and opinions of what the official number 1 quote from this chapter is may differ from the views and opinions expressed by you about what your number 1 favorite quote for this chapter is. In the event that your number 1 favorite quote is different from the one mentioned here, please list your candidate for number 1 quote in the comments below. And the official number 1 quote is when Richard describes the contents of the Book of Counted Shadows, saying, "Most of the book, though, was taken up with directions for countering unforeseen eventualities, resolving problems that could prevent the holder of the boxes from succeeding."